welcome to another episode of The VUU. We are so glad you're joining us today. I'm Christina Rivera, and I am coming to you from just rainy, drizzly, yucky Charlottesville, Virginia. And we are thrilled to be welcoming Dr. Elias Ortega to the show today. But first, the other co-hosts are going to introduce themselves. So take it away, Michael.
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Tino here in Peekskill, New York, where it is also gray and rainy and drizzly. And every time I am inclined to complain about that, I think this could be snow. And it's not. So I'll deal with gray and rainy and drizzly. And next week is school break. So I am headed somewhere warm. Aisha Hauser, you are out there on the West Coast where the sun has barely risen. How are you?
I'm Aisha Hauser, and I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm cursing you all with my weather until we move the VUU to later in the day, because this is nonsense this 8 in the morning. I am cranky. I'm good. It's gray and rainy, and it's early here on the West Coast, and I'm usually an early bird, but not this morning. I'm exhausted. Antonia, ¿cómo estás? We're bilingual here on the VUU today, so.
Bien. I am here in the beautiful archive of the Unitarian Church here in Montclair, New Jersey. And I actually have with me, I'm going to take you on a little tour just for Meadville's sake. Look at that. It's Lee Barker sermons right here, folks. So I thought that was fun. And it is a dreary day. So la. February 23rd is here, and 29th, 152nd. I hate February. I just want to put that on record. So I know some people hate January, but February is the real booger. So yeah, that's how I'm doing. I will be over on YouTube, and please chat away. We are excited to hear what you have to say, and I can't wait to pass it along to the people over here in the Zoom room. So see you then.
And Lori, are you coming out behind the chalice to introduce yourself? That's okay. We have Lori Sorosky, who's on backup tech for us today. So that is who is behind the chalice today. Thank you so much for being with us, Lori. And so usually we start off the VUU with a roundup of what's going on in Unitarian Universalism. And what do we have, folks?
So there's UU the Vote, and did they hire someone? Because I'm seeing postings. UU the Vote is an initiative by the Unitarian Universalist Association to inspire, empower UUs and other folks to vote this year, because it's super important. We're hoping to vote out fascism, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So I don't know, though. Does anyone know if they hired someone? I know they were looking.
I have not seen an announcement.
I haven't seen one either, but fingers crossed. And yeah, and you can find out more about UU the Vote on the UUA website. If you're in a congregation or UU community, check it out, see how you can get in and get participating. It's a great initiative. Another initiative that you all can support, Finding Our Way Home, is our Religious Professionals of Color annual retreat. It's coming up this coming March. And every year, the UU Teach-In organization collects funds to support religious professionals who are going to Finding Our Way Home. The UUA picks up a big chunk of Finding Our Way Home for registration and travel and lodging, but there's still expenses for people who want to go, for religious professionals of color who want to go. And those expenses can be anywhere from missed income. If they are used to doing circuit sermons on Sundays, they're going to miss income. If they want to go out with friends some evening while they're at Finding Our Way Home, we want them to be able to do that. These relationships and the accountability that we develop at Finding Our Way Home is what sustains us in large part for the rest of the year to be serving Unitarian Universalism in our communities. And often it's the only time that religious professionals get are able to be together in community. And it is in no way, shape, or form to say hyperbolic to say that that it saves lives. And so if we are committed to saying that we want religious professionals of color in our communities, then we need to support them. And so there is, so you can do a PayPal me at UU Teach-In, or you can go to uuteachin.org and use the donate link. Anything else out there, folks?
We have some announcements regarding General Assembly have come out this week. I don't think Danielle DeBona had been announced as the preacher at the Service of the Living Tradition last week when we last gathered, and that is really exciting. I am actually going to have to go to the Service of the Living Tradition because I will not miss Danielle's sermon. I will not. I often go out to dinner during the Service of the Living Tradition, I will admit. And it has been announced very recently that Naomi Klein will be the Ware lecturer, and I probably should be more excited than I am about that. But lots of people I know are excited, and hopefully she'll give a great
Somebody
lecture.
posted on my page, I wonder why Naomi Klein. I'm like, my guess is she was the one who said yes, because I think every year we try to get Obama or Michelle, either one, Barack or Michelle. I mean, over the years, they've, folks have tried to get, I don't want to say big name people, but influencers who really are hard to or expensive. So my guess is she may have been third or fourth on the list. I don't know. I mean, God, I have no, she might have been first. I don't know. I'm not spreading rumors. I have no clue. I'm just thinking she may have said yes. I would have loved Winona LaDuke back. She apparently pissed off a shit ton of UUs in Minneapolis, which I'm perfectly fine with. But I think especially because my understanding is this GA Indigenous rights and issues are going to be lifted up. And we're going to be on the land of the Wampanoag, I believe. And so having Winona LaDuke or someone who is an Indigenous activist would have been great.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping for Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a 6-year-old book that A, changed my life, but B, just hit the New York Times bestseller list this week. After 6 years out in circulation, which is pretty astounding in publication, but she's brilliant and also from the Northeast. So I was kind of hoping for her.
But she's now in Northeast.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a disturbing trend, and I'm thrilled with the choice of the Ware lecture. It's not in so much about this particular choice, but I think one of the main reasons that this Ware lecture was chosen was to be able to highlight climate change. She's for those who don't know, she's a climate change activist, author, and I think that we need to look at how in the U.S. we are framing that dialogue and discussion, because so much of the high-profile climate change activists that are getting the press time are white people. So we see, the young woman who came over from Europe, who everybody was, really excited about, and then we've had other people here in the U.S. And it's really taking away from particularly Indigenous climate change activists who have been doing this work for decades. And I think we need to find a way to reframe that. And my hope is that she will do some of that in her Ware lecture. I think that if that isn't present, then we really have to ask ourselves, what are we doing?
Yeah, and even Greta Thunberg is really clear about the fact that she does her work in a multiracial international coalition with Indigenous activists from all over the world. And she's like, yeah, look at these people. Like, don't just ask me.
Yeah, there has to be to reframe this, way to reframe this. So today we are, anything else? I just want to make sure I didn't So today we are thrilled that Dr. Elias Ortega is joining us, newly minted, not so much newly, I don't know, can we still say newly minted, president of Meadville Lombard Theological School. Thank you so much for joining us. We are thrilled that you are here. And your bio says that you're an interdisciplinary scholar who received your MDiv and PhD in Religion and Society, magna cum laude, thank you very much, from Princeton Theological Seminary. And prior coming to Meadville, Dr. Ortega served as Associate Professor of Social Theory and Religious Ethics at Drew University Theological School. He currently serves the larger Unitarian Universalist movement as a member of the UUA's Commission on Institutional Change. We have the links for that, I think, in our chat room bios. And so thank you so much for coming, Dr. Ortega. Yay! So tell us how long you have had the gig and what it's been like to come into Meadville.
Well, I started July 1st. So what, about eight months or so, right, coming into the work. So it's been really good and exciting, right? I think one of the things that I'm happy for friends that help me reframe and refocus questions, right? I have a good friend who encouraged me to never ask the question if I'm happy in the job, right? But whether if I'm finding it fulfilling, right? And I'm enjoying it, right? I think that's a much better way to think about it, right? Because happiness is fickle, right, in some ways. And the things that make me happy are not necessarily connected to the job that I do. I find it fulfilling and engaging, right, and rewarding in other ways. But happiness is not, and that does not mean that I'm unhappy, right, or upset. I think it's more realistic to the kind of work that comes with their opportunities, and there are also interesting challenges, right, to manage and work through. And I'm finding those to be deeply rewarding. I think I need to go back to Facebook and do a clarification. I posted a couple of days ago that I have a great day. It was a good day, but I didn't say why it was a good day. Right? And I think for me, oftentimes a good day in the office are those days that, you know, some people that love you enough, right, to hold you accountable to the work that you're trying to do, and at the same time they encourage you, right, whether they are face-to-face or, you know, on Zoom, or just giving you a text that's still looking in your eye and tell you the things that you need to hear, as they prop you up as well, right? That makes it a good day. Being able to have conversation with folks that support the school, right, in multiple ways, financially, with their time, is really fulfilling, right? And hear for them as to why, right, they opt to support the school. For me, it's rewarding. Being able to have you know, a staff meeting and throw down and do some real work, have some intense and difficult conversations about, you know, things that we have to do, but also laugh while we're doing it. Right? That makes it a really, really, really good day. I think, at least in my book, I can leave the office and the work and say, like, you know, we did some good work today. We're moving the needle in the right direction. Right? Those make it a good day. And I think, well, I can say with confidence that those days are more frequent than not, right, in the work that we're doing. Right?
Was there a number one thing that you wanted to hit the ground running? I don't want to say change, but transform, modify, add. Is there something that you were like, okay, this is number one on the list of 7? My dog is being very cute. Was there something that you came in, think that you could talk about that you wanted to change or do?
So just for my own clarification, is the question more about kind of a vision question? Is more about kind of a practical managerial?
Well, how about both? What's your vision? What's the vision answer? And what is your practical answer? So 2-part question, A and B.
Okay. Well, you know, I think one of the challenges that I find, and this is true for any transition, right, in leadership, right, whether it is, you know, in academic leadership, like in my case, or whether it's in congregational leadership, right, et cetera, is that there's this tense balance, right, between how do you communicate, right, the changes that you see that are needed? How do you get to know, and how quickly do you get to know the reality of the work that is happening, right, and what has happened that way, and also do the PR work that folks don't get the perception that anything that you're doing is something that critical, right, of the prior institution, right? Because I think, right, you were not in those shoes, right, so you did not know exactly all the processes that were happening right before. So it's a process of both learning, right, and establishing a new style. But at the same time, you honor the work that has been done, right, and establish some groundwork for the future work. Right. So I'm going to say, for my perspective, right, one of the things that has been very important is to create a process of both conversation and more detailed accountability structure to the work that we're doing, right? And some of that work is how do we track the work that we're doing, and how do we close the loop when things are closed, right? So that we know, right, and we are in the same page. And I would say one of the biggest transitions that for us that has happened, and I think we did it all with some trepidation, right, in some sense, but also in other sense, technologically, we were somewhat kind of forced to do it as well. A little bit later in the game, once we got started, is to become more digitalized, right, in the work that we do, and occupy a shared working environment, right, a digital working environment. And I think one of the things that, even though it means basically learning a new language from scratch, right, and a new flow of work, it has also allowed us to have more, I'm going to say, pertinent conversations right to the work, because then we have to intentionally break some silos, whether we are in the office or not, in how we communicate. And in fact, perhaps the biggest advantage of that has been to have to be specific about how to communicate, right? So in other words, we assume that we're doing a particular kind of work, and we assume that we know the work that we have to do and who's have the information, how that information is shared. But rarely do we actually sit down and say, like, hey, who has this information? When do we need it by? How does it flow? How does your work impact my work, right, in terms of time? And just even looking at the calendar, right, because to move into a digital environment, we have to do that. Like, what is the calendar of stuff that we're doing, and when does it happen? And that was a big eye opener. And it's like, oh, right, these are the moments in which we are bottlenecking ourselves. Can we move that in other spaces? How can we help, right? These are the kind of the times in which a particular department is really busy. This is the time in which a particular department is not as busy, right? Or what are the pieces of one department that impacts the work of the other, but we have not communicated that, right? And some of the things are just really kind of simple stuff, like what is the timeline of when do we have to make an announcement, and what does it take to have an announcement out, right? Some of that stuff is very, very simple, but without having the clear process of communication, right, it can kind of drag an operation in ways that is not kind of necessary. So one of the biggest then opportunities for us is how do we kind of put time into this kind of more tedious work of getting it off the ground, so that then we can get to the more meaningful work, right? And so far, let me say that I'm going to own this. I hate Microsoft systems at times. Like, I don't speak Microsoft really well, so I needed to have to learn Microsoft, right? And I realized there are some possibilities, and I think as a staff we're actually learning together, right, about the system, and sharing information and teaching each other about how to use it. There are things that I know how to do really well. I mean, the team environment, I understand it. I can work okay with it. But Word documents itself is just so clumsy for me as a user that I just do not, I rely on others to help me. I don't understand how that works, right? And I think it's been good for us to do that. But what it also translates for us outside of kind of the direct office space and the kind of service and leadership that we're trying to do is it has helped us clarify questions around the assumptions with whom we connect and how. Right, and what do we need to do in our end to be more kind of explicit about implicit pieces, and also understand that will require other kinds of work in our end, right? And those are moments that are helping us really think through the curriculum change that we are putting in effect. Is helping us think of the ways in which we engage with congregations, right, and the denomination wide. Do we have to create feedback loops? How do we create those feedback loops, right? How do we even get stuff on the ground running that we know who's doing what, where, and why? and more importantly, how to track that work, right, into the work that we're doing. So those have been exciting, and as you can imagine, it's taking a good time, right, a good amount of time, but it's also, I think, given us some good perspective, right, in the possibilities ahead. One of the things that I say this, and I say this with a little bit tongue in cheek, but also with passion and conviction, is that even though as your youth, we tend to speak about being very intentional about outreach, right, and being very interfaith and the like, institutionally, we tend to navel gaze a lot, right, and think that, you know, we have this down. We need nobody else, right, outside of the space to help us think through this.
You noticed that, did you? That's one of our biggest freaking problems.
About 7 years now, I noticed that, right? And it's been kind of intriguing, right, to see the ways in which that replicates institutionally, and I think it's a matter of outreach, right? It's a matter of connection, but being intentional about that level of hospitality, and largely, you know, we are a mighty organization in terms of human resources, right, and some financial capacity, but we're also small in numbers. Right, and I think we can maximize our impact in other kinds of collaborations that at the moment, right, are not non-existent, and being learners all the way through. So that's something that I'm really excited about in the next coming years for us as an institution, is the way in which we intentionally engage, right, folks who are not UU, right, in some conversations around ministry and leadership. So that's a long answer to your question, but
I love it.
All that in about 7 months, you know, just.
So one of the things I noticed that you had put out there that speaks a lot to what you were just talking about, the technological fluency, but you actually put it in terms of it being one of the priorities of proposed 5 areas of effective religious leadership in the 21st century. Yeah. And I read these when you had put them out, and just reread them again for today. And I wanted to like talk about them, but I also want to talk about the process in which you came to them, because I think that you know, as we are looking at ourselves as a faith and really trying to talk about what we need to be as we move forward, and as we, you know, no, I love it, evolve, what, you know, the process around this is as important as, you know, the product, and so that I'll just name for our listeners. So the 5 areas are fostering intentional learning communities for social change and shared leadership, robust engagement with Unitarian Universalist theology and with the larger UU movement, cultural competency skills and religious literacy, the growing importance of ecumenical and multi-faith education for religious leaders. And then that 5th one, which we were talking a little bit about, was, but in this case, technological fluency for iMinistry, which I think is, you know, super important too, as we head into, you know, even more and more digital. So can you tell us a little bit about how those priorities came to be?
So I think each one of them will have a particular angle, right, in which I came to them. So for example, there's 2 that I can speak up. I think I can give very kind of concrete answers to. One of them is the UU theology, and the second one will be the technology piece. So in UU theology, right, I think one of my biggest concerns, and I'm coming at this as a theological educator, right, and that is somebody who breathes theology in some ways. I'm a sociologist by training, right? So I come at the work of studying theology from the social science perspective, which means that one of the concerns that I have on the interest in theology for me is the ways in which it can help shape particular discourse, ways of behavior and interaction with people, right? The way in which theology can ground organizations, right? And one of the things that I'm deeply concerned about, right, in UU as a practice, is that We talk a lot about being a faith community, and we talk a lot about being a spiritual community, but we don't spend a lot of time doing serious theology, right? And what I mean, let me give you a good example. One of the things that I find really unique about VUU as a faith movement is that we don't really do adult faith formation, right? A lot of our practices towards faith formation are geared toward youth and children, right? The RE program. And oftentimes that formation also happens disconnected from the church, right? In the youth group, in the senior high group, or in other spaces, right? So it's not unclear what is the connection. I'm thinking from kind of the user point of view and the person being shaped and formed by that practice, right? My experience of being shaped as a spiritual person and a religious community is happening outside, right, of the space that you can consider the larger sacred space, right? If you consider sanctuaries like that. But it also means that for adults, right, we tend to understand that that is the moment of faith formation. Whatever happens, right, in that 45 minutes, that is it. We don't have intentionally outside of that by and large, unless we do a book club, right, in some shape, way, or form. That is not spiritual formation. Interesting, right, and engaging, but it's not faith formation. But more and large, if we take those 45 minutes, I'm going to say that most of the folks do not understand the theology of the structure of the service itself. It's not a conversation that we have, right? For example, is the order of service a liturgy, right? If you were to pose that question to folks, folks would be like, "What are you talking about?" Like, and it's like, well, actually, this is a liturgy, right? We have secularized elements of it, right? But it's still supposed to move us through particular elements of interacting with the divine, right? Or the holy, or the sacred, or being in community, right? Which whatever name you want to call it. But that is not something that we do kind of with intentionality, right? But it also means that because we are, there's no polite way of saying this. I'm just going to say, one of the things that we have not done as a movement is help our people heal from religious trauma and hurt, right? Or what I'm starting to call, for a number of years now, just being more public about this, we do a lot of theological malpractice, right? And what I mean by that malpractice is that we don't, as faith leaders, we don't help people heal through the hurt, whatever the hurt is. And then the space that we create, the sacred space, is a sanitized space, right? It is not. I think any faith community, any religious community, by and large, understand that sacred, holy spaces are dangerous spaces, right? If you look at, the Hebrew Bible, right, the Holy of Holies, the high priest only goes there once, and he goes there once tied with a rope and the chain with a bell, just in case he dies in the holy place, right? Only once a year, right? The other can go on their different times, in different spaces, right? Or you prepare and do the libations to enter into, right, the sacred space if you're a practicing Muslim, right? In indigenous religions, right, it's the same process, right? The holy is not something that you just interact, right, with laissez-faire. But for UUs, that's not the reality, right? We enter in as we own this space in such a way that it is, we co-create and we consume it, and if we don't like it, we talk back to you. Right, and I find that what it creates is a process that we, as a faith movement, do not interact intentionally with our tradition, right? And understand not only the roots, but also the ways in which the branches have expanded from the roots, right? And understand the seeds that have fallen and created new trees, right? That are still UU theology. And I think we as a faith community then come to the place that we feel that we can build our own understanding because we are UU and it's my theology. But that is disconnected, right? It's very individualistic. It's not connected or accountable to community as a whole. And it doesn't sharpen itself against the tradition. I am by no way a traditionalist, right? But I think you have to understand tradition in order to understand where are you separating from, right? The reasons why, and the ways in which it can grow and expand, right? So traditions is not static, right? That is traditionalism, and it's dead. Traditions expand and grow, right? You gain new vocabulary, you learn new things of doing what you do, right? I think, immigrant communities will learn how to cook in other places, home dishes without the ingredients, and we innovate, right, in how we're doing it, but it's still kind of your food, right? And I think that's one of the things that I'm missing right, in our movement as a theological community, right? And part of the challenge, and I think this is why thinking about theological malpractice and religious trauma is so important, is that to do some of the foundational work would actually require us to struggle through our Judeo-Christian heritage, right, in ways that a lot of folks who are coming or hurt because of Christianity or Judaism, right, for example, are not particularly ready or equipped to do, right? We have not equipped them as a faith community to do that work, right? And that is in us. I mean, folks talk about J. Luther Adams, Christian theologian, right? And then folks don't read it because it's too Christian, right? But since J. Luther Adams, what are our other theologians, right? I mean, we have the Bishop Cole, the Charlotte and others, right? But we do not engage with them in the same way. Rebecca Parker, right? That's been one of the criticism for her as a theologian, that she's too Christian, right? And for many, that's an excuse not to engage, right? So I think that's part of the work that we need to start doing as a faith community, right? I think there was a question there.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I'm tracking you properly, because I think what I hear you saying is that is twofold. So we have people who are coming in who have been traumatized in their religion, in their previous religious upbringing, in some other faith or denomination. And so we're not doing a good job of identifying that those folks need a specific type of trauma ministry to be able to then engage in a deep Unitarian Universalist experience. And so I think I hear that. And then I think I also hear, for folks who are coming to us that don't have that trauma experience, we're also creating trauma in that we've sanitized our spaces so much to try and not further harm those folks who are coming in with that previous trauma, because we're not doing a good job of actually addressing the trauma. We're just trying to make a space that feels good. And because, the lowest common denominator, it almost becomes of, because we're not actually addressing that. Is that, am I interpreting that right?
Yes, I think that is correct. Recently I have a conversation with Reverend Jan Carson Bull, and we were talking about this issue. And one of the things that she shared with me is that the way that she has talked about this is using metaphors of souvenirs and scars. Right, so you have scar tissues and souvenirs in the context of your religious experience, right? And that means that, with scars, we actually both talk about scars, right? You tell the stories about them, and sometimes, they are not painful, and sometimes they hurt, right? Every so often, right? So it is a reminder, right, of what happened. But you also have souvenirs, right? That it reminds you of the good time, the enjoyment. The stories attached to them are different. Right, so we have to be equipped to be able to do both, right? But the injury itself, even if it's still painful and you have a scar tissue, right, and is healing or it has healed, right? It might impact your movement, right, and your mobility, right, and your health, but you still continue right on. And I think that is part of the challenge, right? And how do we do that with authenticity, right? And calling us into being deeply accountable, right, to the movement. Because otherwise it becomes I believe whatever I want, right? I build my own theology and I move through it because it is what I believe, and nobody can hold me accountable to our community because I don't like it, period. Right, and I think what that eventually does is that it stunts our own spiritual growth, right, and unfolding. Right, because we're not willing to expand, and it is difficult work, right? Don't get me wrong, it is very difficult work. I know personally I have some experience in seminary that I'm still, right, kind of working through, right? And part of it was the particular context in which I was, that I needed to really work through some stuff. And in fact, I was having a conversation with a colleague from the very similar time, and actually my colleague and my spouse, and both say the same thing. Right, just be careful that you don't, reawaken that, experience from seminary and fall into the same patterns, right? And it was a good signpost because I was not aware, right, that I was kind of starting already the same kind of, mood, and that was a really helpful wake-up call, right? to me. So like, wait, hold on, that's true. But he also pointed that I still have some stuff to work through from that time that I haven't necessarily worked through. And I'm starting to make some of those phone calls and say, like, hey, we need to talk about a couple of things. It might not be important for you, but this is something that is important to me, as a person. So then to move on in the other conversation, if that was okay, about technology. Part of my background is in thinking through telecommunications, right? Communication technology has been part of my own research interest, the way in which technology kind of shape what it means to be human, right? How do we understand the world? How do we interact with the world? I mean, these little machines now, right? Many of us didn't grow up with them, but for a younger generation, right, Z and beyond, like this is an extension of their senses, right? This is not an apparatus, right? This is part of the way in which they interact and experience the world, right? So that means that has always been the case. Technology shape our biology and our culture, and in some ways we can allow it to control it, even if they are our own creations, right? Which is in itself really interesting to me. But in terms of religion, right? Technology and religion have this very kind of intriguing relationship, because there's a lot of technology that we do not consider technology, but it is. For example, having printing Bibles, right? The Reformation without the printing press wouldn't have happened. But that means that having printing press make an explosion on literacy, and then you can control you lose control of the discourse in a way that the churches were used to, right? Because then folks are interacting with the text, right, individually. Then later on, you can think about radio, right? Radio technology kind of allows interaction of folks from different parts of the country or the world to hear expressions about their religion differently than what they're used to. So I'm starting thinking kind of early televangelism, right, via the radio or even TV, right? I always joke that in the Caribbean there was an evangelist. His name was Gigi Avila, who used to hate television, right? Television was a devil's box. Right, you don't see it. It's sinful and creates all kind of damaging relationship and destroy the family, etc. Forward 15, 20 years later, he's the biggest televangelist in the Caribbean, Central South America. Right, so he learned how to then maximize that particular space.
Dr. Ortega, can I just, I want you to go back to something, because the point about adult faith formation, because I think actually it's why a lot of people go to seminary. I'm making a generalization and y'all can be upset at me if you want to, our viewers, but I genuinely believe over the time I've been a Unitarian Universalist, one thing I've noticed about some people, not all, hashtag not all people, who go to seminary do so because they are not fulfilled in their own congregation, not necessarily because either they should be a minister or it is helpful to them or the denomination that they go into ministry. However, that's a phenomenon that I've absolutely noticed. So is there, and then you alluded to that, like, there's trauma, there's been neglect of really centering our theology. So what are the ways that you envision Meadville Lombard addressing that with your seminarians now?
So I'm making a note to myself for something that I want to forget to share with you. For me, these two pieces are connected, right? And what I want to say that to close the point on technology is that a lot of us are doing religion technologically, right? Because we don't feel that we have to necessarily be in community, either because of work commitment, space, etc. Our experience of religion is becoming digitalized. And that is either one-to-one, oftentimes a one-to-many. And not all spaces are created equal, right, in that experience. And how do we interact? But what that also means is that then our faith formation path become kind of tailored and individualized, right? What I can consume, where I consume it, but it also expansive, right? The market for religious ideas now is, you log in YouTube and you just type whatever you want, and you can expose yourself, right, to a lot of different ways of understanding, right, the religious universe. Now, I think this is not a problem solely about UUs as a faith, but it's a problem that I think is a trend in theological formation in general, right? You have a generation between, let's say, 30s and 20s, right, that grew up maybe with minimal exposure to religion, right, or to multiple exposure to religion, but not kind of religious in the traditional sense, right, in which, you know, either Sunday, Saturday, or Friday are the times in which you're a faith community, right, whatever that may look like. So folks are becoming then energized either through the college experience, university, through a life crisis or a life change, right? Folks have an experience to start seeking, right, for connection. And what I'm experiencing, right, either, and this is not solely UU, I think this is theological education in general, is that folks are understanding that in congregational life becomes kind of religious and faith light in some ways, right? That the only path towards fulfillment, right, or deeper growth is to go to a theological school. Now, keep in mind, some other denomination I'm thinking, we don't have anything similar to what Pentecostals do via Bible institutes, right? That are more kind of localized spaces of some theological education and formation, right? We don't have anything akin to that, right? So we create a challenge. Related to that, and this is particular for us UUs, is that the only path that we have authorized for religious leadership as a movement so far is to become a minister, right? And in some ways that is the only path that become kind of really authorizing spaces that are granted the kind of recognition, right, of leadership. And that also means that you will have kind of lay leaders who are committed to the movement, right, who want to do very creative work, has a potential and a passion to do it, that feel kind of the need, right, to go to seminary, to have their ministry, right, which is active, acknowledged as ministry, right. And again, this is part of the dynamic. There's nowhere in the books, right, but I think it's some of the dynamics that you oftentimes see for folks and have here over the years, right, folks commenting, right, that is that process. Now, in terms of seminary education, right, what are we doing and what we can do? There is on the one hand a time and practical challenge, right, for us, because part of the challenge is where seminary education, theological school, right, in general, are geared in a way that you're basically assuming that folks are coming with the background, right, at least a very solid foundation upon which to build, right. So in some ways, right, you're coming to theological school to do graduate level work, right, in religion and theology, meaning that you already have a particular kind of foundation on which you can build. But that is oftentimes not the case, right? So folks are learning kind of the one-on-one basics, right, of UU theology and history and information at the same time that they have to move through a challenging curriculum, right, that is preparing you for ordained ministry, right, or any other kind of faith service, and that creates a kind of dichotomy that I'm thinking from a learning perspective, right, you are kind of compressed, right, because you're already coming with deep lacunas, right, into the work. So at this particular moment, right, the way in which I can see that shifting, right, is with intentional conversations and interaction with faith communities on the ground, right, congregations, right, what our congregations are actually doing, and how can we partner with congregations to kind of both understand what are the challenges they're facing on the ground, but also help equip, right, promote the kind of theological literacy, right, and practices to shape formation. And in fact, one of my hopes of that is that I think that can actually lead to the growth of the movement, right, because then folks will not feel that they have to go to another faith community, right, to be deeper into the work.
We have a really robust conversation happening online about trauma, religious trauma and ministry. And I want to throw out two questions that folks have put in our online chat. One from Kiana Perkins, super fan of our show, who wonders if we're talking about trauma-informed faith formation, where is the intersection of therapy and faith? And does, I guess I would add, does that exist in our congregations or elsewhere. And Lori Stone-Sertowski from Behind the Chalice asks, given this deep need in our faith communities, how do we prepare ministers to serve in bold ways when congregations may be reluctant to do their own work and remediate religious trauma? So I guess two questions. We can have other shows on your other priorities, but this religious trauma and theological malpractice has clearly struck a nerve with lots of people, and it's fascinating. So if you might,
actually, I can answer the question, but I need to make a caveat first, and a very important one, because the membership professionals is the organization that is having a lot of this conversation on religious trauma, right? And I think last year they put a conference together right on the topic. They have folks who are operating trauma informed, and they're doing a workshop in GA, right, dealing with the topic. And I think that is important, right, to recognize and lift up that work because it is happening. And the reason I think one of the reasons that is not often recognized, right, is because the work that they do is not oftentimes framed as ministry, right? And again, given that the role that we recognize as ministry is more often than not, right, the ordained minister, right, the ministers, the work of the different teams, right, even the board, the work that the board do is ministry, right? The work that the worship team does is ministry, right? The RE work is ministry, right? The membership engagement, right? That is ministry, right? Stewardship is ministry, but we don't see it as such more often than not. Some contexts are different, right? I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think my sense is as a mood, right? That's not our discourse. In my understanding, one of the reasons the membership professionals, right, starting to do this trauma-informed work is because they are the first responders oftentimes, right? And they are the ones who pick up the call when somebody's in crisis to make the appointment with the minister or somebody else, right? And when you make that phone call, then you have the conversation with the folks, right? So they are the ones that are interacting right away and doing the first line of ministry, right, into the work. I just wanted to lift that up because I think it's important, and I will say that it's even actually shaping the own way in which I think about this conversation, right? In terms of how do we work that then for theological education and preparing ministers for, I'm going to share this idea, and it could be a little, I don't know how we're going to land with folks, but as a sociologist, right, I think that one of the realities in our congregations is that what I'm encouraging folks and students to think about is that any particular ministerial context should be kind of presumed to be an after pastor situation, right? And this is not just sexual misconduct, right? This could be all the levels of misconduct that could happen. And it might not necessarily have been the minister itself, right? But what I mean by that is that a lot of our congregations have experienced trauma that has traveled generationally through the congregation. And oftentimes folks are not even aware, right, of that, but it lives in this space, right? And what the reality of that is that every so often it will come up, right? It will come up. So part of the after pastor situation, right, are situations in which there is a case of either ministerial misconduct, right, that have created harm within the community, right, and that takes, right, many of the different shapes, and I would say as VUUs, we have not been particular. In some ways, we have been proactive. In other ways, not proactive enough, right, because of a process of negotiated resignation has allowed that a particular, a failed ministry, right, for whatever the reasons may be closed. And oftentimes that repeats itself in other spaces. Now, there are many reasons, right, why a ministry can go sideways, right? It's not always the minister, it's not always the congregation, right? But there are spaces in which you can see some things happening over and over again, right? If a particular congregation have 4 negotiated resignations in a row, right, there's something in the system, right, to make that a reality, right? Otherwise, I don't know how to explain it. Which means that there's a trauma and there's issues in that space that have not been dealt with effectively, right? Given our culture of secrecy and informality, we tend not to be open, right, about those things. And what we oftentimes do is like, well, I will let you make your own formation and your own sense about what's happening, which means that you're stepping in all kinds of landmines and minefields and processes that are not helpful to you. So I think in terms of ministerial preparation, right, to be trauma informed, one of the things that we need to do is equip our candidates to manage conflict effectively, right? And I mean conflict, right, without in a larger sense, right? Not just interpersonal conflict or arguments, right, but understanding how to engage a system that is already malfunctioning, right, because of prior hurt, right? And it could be the case that you are in a system in which folks are not in the space anymore, but that hurt still lives in there, right? And that means, and the conflict piece is important because in order to engage that, you're going to have to move through very intentional conversation and discussion to decide who you want to be as a faith community, right? What are you willing to let go? What are you going to keep? And what are you going to, let's say, as we say, call it community, pray your way through, right?
And I think that's important for congregations to, as we come into this time of being more open about, trying to do fewer negotiated resignations that have, clauses of confidentiality, and trying to do fewer, to be more open and transparent about what's going on in congregations. I think one of the messages that we also need to pull in that conflict isn't a bad thing, that transformation through conflict can be a good thing. That conflict can surface the things that need to be talked about and loved through and prayed through and worked through. And so that conflict in itself, our conflict avoidance around that is very typical of the white supremacy culture, that conflict, it can actually feel good because you can actually get to the things that you just really need to dig into and get through. And so, having, as you said, candidates who are willing to do that and not just wanting to make it feel good, as quickly as humanly possible is really great to hear.
And so something that gets me excited, like before joining this call, right? I was at a call with some faculty members, and we're actually talking about worship and liturgy. And one of the pieces that for me, and the reason I mentioned that is because in order to do this work effectively, we are going to have to create new rituals, right? And new ways of being together in worship to help us and give us the sustenance and the strength to actually make this work possible. Right. And as a faith community, right, and that is one of the strengths I think that we can put into the system, right? And I think for us at Meadville, right, this is a piece that we are really engaging concretely, right? And one of the things that we are having very intentional conversations around is the art pieces that we are going to be able to meet curricularly, but they are pieces that we have to work co-curricularly, right, and in partnership with others to kind of round up that experience. Right, because I mean, there's so much we can do with 90 credits in 3 years and the internship and all the other works, but we also know that we have alums and others that we can call into the work, right, to round up some of these experiences, to have intentional conversation around what's happening right in your congregation, how are you managing it, because we can learn from those experiences, right? We can learn from that space. Actually, one of the things that I'm thinking, I have a recent visit to the Virginia congregation with Jean Papke, who's also a member of our board. And in that conversation, one of the things that I learned, right, in that space is that we tend to prioritize the learning that happens in theological school disconnected from what happened in the congregational level. Like, for example, we cannot replicate a board experience, right, in a seminary classroom without having actual board members, right, being part of that conversation. And for me, it's like, whoa, what would it look like for us to kind of recreate either via Zoom or in space, right, a board meeting that is an actually real board meeting, right, and have folks participate as an enlarged learning community, right, which is one of the priorities that I hope to, that I'm going to be working towards, right, co-creating those intentional learning communities, because that is important, right? If we want effective ministers, right, that ought to happen. Another conversation that is popping up for us is smaller congregations, right? I think in our movement, we tend to think always about the big congregations, right? But the smaller ones have such a big role to play in preparing and in kind of, I don't want to say finishing school, right? But most of our ministers and recent grads will go more than likely to a smaller congregation. And I think the discourse oftentimes is that this is kind of JV, and it's like, no, this is not JV. This is real ministry with folks that are willing to do the work and that also need to help and can teach you a lot, right? And can work with you and shape you in particular ways as a minister. And it's like, well, that is a good opportunity for us to engage, right, in the process as Meadville, right, that help and strengthen communities of faith, right, that understand the value, right, that they are teaching congregations in other ways, and we don't tend to think about them that way. And it's like, well, why not? That is an imagination problem, not a capacity problem. And I think we can think through it.
I have to say, as a student at Meadville Lombard in my community and my congregational studies year, I think that our process of having students in the actual congregations and also having the ability to be back in class and having connections to discussion groups and ministers who we can process our learning with is so important. I believe it's one of the better parts of our model, having a contextual learning program, because I can't recreate all of this in the classroom. I am here 20 hours a week, as unfinished as I am. And there's no better way to be finished than in an environment where this is the deal. This is what you must learn. And you get an opportunity to go back to school and discuss it with people who have done this work, who are doing this work. I think it's another great model that Meadville is hiring ministers in our faith and ministers outside of our faith to help us learn what it means to be a minister. I know that we are at our last 2 minutes. Christina, what's happening next week?
So just a big thank you, Dr. Ortega, for joining us and telling us more about what's going on in Meadville. We so appreciate it. And so next week we have Reverend Danielle DeBona and Reverend Clyde Grubbs coming to talk to us about GA 2020. Let's get real. And we're going to talk about how to live our faith while going into colonized Indigenous lands. So join us next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye.